So without further ado, I am pleased to introduce our speakers. Today we have a panel discussing a panel titled Creating a More Resilient Food System Through Regional Partnerships. With us, we have Elizabeth Herendeen with Salmon State, George Anderson, who's president of the Chignik Intertribal Coalition, Natalie Sattler, program director, Alaska Longlines Fishermen Association, Samuel Schimel, chair of the Arctic Youth Network, and Stephen Rhodes, director of marketing at the Seafood Processors Cooperative. If I've mispronounced any of your names or who you represent, please feel free to correct me. And let's see, I'll hand it off to Elizabeth and take it away with your slides whenever you're ready.
Great. Thanks so much, Glenna. And thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I think everyone joining today gets bonus points hanging in there on Saturday afternoon. So we really appreciate you making the time. And yeah, in this panel, we're going to be touching on a lot of the themes that we've been hearing throughout the conference when it comes to food systems, things like food security, food sovereignty, resiliency. And so our hope in this panel is that we're going to explore specifically some of the partnerships that have been forming around the state, specifically in response to some of the immediate disruptions that we've been seeing from things like COVID, as well as climate change. And how those disruptions have been impacting our local communities and food systems. The folks that you're about to hear from, have been some of the key partners involved in launching the Seafood Donation Program, which was formed in 2020 by the Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association and the Alaska Sustainable Fisheries Trust. And we're going to hear from them about, what they've learned along the way, some of their stories and their plans moving forward. After their presentations and initial introductions, we'll dig a little deeper into, I'll present the panelists with a round of questions, and then we'll open it up to your questions and comments at the end. And like Glenna said, please use the chat box to put your questions in there, and we'll try to get to all of them at the end and have a conversation about some of these really big and complex topics. So we're first going to hear from Natalie Sattler, who is the program director at the Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association and is also coordinator for the Alaskan Zone Community Supported Fisheries. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Natalie, and I think you're going to share some slides with us.
Yes, I am. Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. I'm happy to be here and thank you for joining us today. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully I've got it figured out here, and share a little bit about the Seafood Donation Program that the Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association and our partner organization, Alaska Sustainable Fisheries Trust, started a couple of years ago as a result of the pandemic. So give me just a moment, to hopefully this is gonna. Okay, do you guys just see a slide? Because yes.
Yeah, that's great.
None of my notes, right? So, all right. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes going over the our donation program and just giving some history and what we have done to date. As Elizabeth mentioned, and I said, I'm the program director for the Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association, which is an alliance of small boat commercial fishermen committed to sustainable fisheries and thriving coastal communities located in Sitka, Alaska. And then also we have a partner organization, the Alaska Sustainable Fisheries Trust, which also works to strengthen fishing communities and marine resources through research, education, and economic opportunity. And both of our organizations collaborate closely and have since 2009, each have their own programs, but we also have a shared suite of programs. So if you imagine like two circles overlapping, those are our shared programs. And Alaskan Zone is one of those, and that is a piece. It's the first community support fishery in Alaska, and it was created to help make Alaska seafood more accessible to Alaskans while also helping Alaska fishermen make a fair wage. In addition, our founders wanted their seafood sales to generate funding for ALPHA, which is Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association, our fishery conservation projects, and 100% of our Alaskan Zone seafood sales go back into those projects to support conservation of Alaska's fisheries, create equitable fishery access, and now our seafood donation program. Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about one of those shared programs, which is the seafood donation program. So as I mentioned, the seafood donation program came out of the impacts of COVID-19, which really highlighted the long-standing workforce development and food insecurity issues in Alaska. The seafood industry has long provided the backbone of coastal economies, but relies on outside labor for processing, marketing, and shipping. The quarantine requirements due to COVID-19 led to significant labor shortages and high costs. And just a statistic here is, in addition, less than 1% of the seafood caught in Alaska actually stays in Alaska to benefit our local economy. And Alaska is one of the top 5 most food insecure states in the nation, with 95% of the $2 billion of food Alaskans purchase is imported. So in response to all these issues and to increase food insecurity and workforce development issues, in 2020, March of 2020, ASFT, which is Alaska Sustainable Fisheries Trust, and ALPHA relied on our existing Alaskan Zone relationships and infrastructure to launch a collaborative seafood donation program. And we were able to deploy to date around $2.5 million to purchase and deliver more than 640,000 pounds in meals, donated seafood meals to individuals and families in Alaska and the Pacific Northwest facing food insecurity. And doing this not only addressed immediate food security demand, but also provided market stability for our local fishermen whose supply chains were completely disrupted by the COVID-19 crisis. And COVID-19 also brought to light the complex and longstanding issues, including the need to increase Alaska's regional food security overall and U.S. consumption of U.S. seafood in particular. And also declining wild salmon runs around Alaska as a result of climate change only compounded many of these issues. A little bit more is with the seafood donations from local fishermen and our web-based donation site, we were able to deliver COVID-19 safe seafood to the doorsteps of local individuals and families identified as food insecure throughout Alaska and the Pacific Northwest. Through the same infrastructure, we also provided weekly, and we continue to do so, bulk seafood donations to our Sitka residents, some of them in our food pantries, wellness organizations, including the Sitka Tribe of Alaska, the Salvation Army, and many other groups within Sitka. And within weeks of launching the program initially, we began receiving requests for seafood from many other communities. As calls for assistance continue to come in, we clearly saw the need to expand outside our community. And as most of you know, Sitka is on an island about 100 miles from other communities. So it's logistically maybe not the easiest place to transport seafood from. But with financial support from many of our partners, including Catch Together, Multiplier, the Alaska Community Foundation, and other key partnerships with groups such as The Wave, Sea Alaska, and others, we have been grateful to address food insecurity as well as provide financial support to our Alaska fishermen facing severely diminished markets as a result of the pandemic. And one example, I'm going to give a couple examples of how we did this, is we supplementation of the lingcod price with a direct stipend to our fishermen through purchasing the component of the sablefish catch that's historically been sold to restaurants and were forced to close due to the pandemic. This fish was then donated to the Wave Foundation, which is located in Pacific Northwest, and it was paired with seafood with locally purchased produce and grains and served hot lunches and distributed to food boxes to Columbia River tribes and others in need of in that area. And then one other example is, because commercial fisheries were canceled and tribal entities chose to halt subsistence harvest to protect what few salmon were returning to local streams, These communities, some of them wanted whole sockeye, so families could process the salmon as per cultural traditions, and working as family as a community to smoke, dry, and preserve as much of the fish as possible. Again, with support from Catch Together and Alaska Community Foundation, we purchased 42,000 pounds of Bristol Bay round sockeye from Northline Seafoods, also out of Sitka, and which has a fleet of fishermen who are 90% Alaskan Native. And that was delivered to tribal entities for distribution to residents of the 4 Chignik Bay area communities. The tribal food pantry also provided seafood to community residents who had moved to Anchorage in search of work when local fisheries closed, increasing food security for these Alaska residents who value sockeye for its nutrition and deep cultural connections. And we also had a similar project where we purchased and delivered Kita salmon and sockeye salmon to the Anchorage YMCA military families facing food insecurity. We've learned so much through all of these different partnerships, and we hope to continue building and expanding on our seafood donation program. In the past 2 years, in addition to the examples given already, we have provided seafood donations to the Food Bank of Alaska, Juneau Tlingit and Haida Central Council and their members, several Native groups in the surrounding Anchorage area, the Armed Services YMCA, as I mentioned, Yukon Delta communities, and several Southeast communities and groups. And a few of our panelists that are coming up will speak specifically to some of those donations and those outreach efforts. All right, and so as I mentioned, we've donated over 640,000 meals, and we have learned a lot through these partnerships and continue to try to make food systems more equitable and more sustainable. Wild Alaska seafood is not a commodity to be sold to the lowest bidder. It's a premium, a wild food that deserves a fair and transparent place in the market. Healthy, thriving communities require equitable access to healthy, sustainable food sources. This is especially true for Indigenous communities whose diets and traditions have relied on local wild seafood for generations. And we've also realized that local problems are best addressed through local solutions. We have created so many relationships through this effort, and those collaborations are the building blocks that lead to long-term solutions and impact. We continue to receive requests for seafood from tribal entities and coastal communities. And while private funding for these projects is hugely appreciated, we recognize the funding will not be available forever in the future. Climate change is reducing ocean productivity and stressing salmon runs in the Gulf of Alaska, and we anticipate both commercial and subsistence salmon harvest to decline as a result. The need isn't going away anytime soon, and by growing our seafood donation program, we hope to make not only our food systems more equitable, but our communities more resilient and healthy. And later on, I will speak during the session about our plans to develop a long-term strategy to address food insecurity and workforce development in the seafood industry. Just to finish up, the pandemic has really highlighted the need to increase regional food security overall and to increase US consumption of US seafood in particular. As we all know, seafood is highly nutritious. It has a low carbon footprint than other forms of protein. And if purchased from community-based fishermen, seafood purchases will help rebuild coastal communities hard hit by the pandemic and climate change. To date, we couldn't have done and reached as many individuals and communities as we have without the generous support and collaboration of our many partners. And I think that's it, wrapping it up. But I look forward to our discussion later and talking a bit more about our plans for the future. So thanks so much.
Perfect. Thanks, Natalie. Yeah, and it really has been amazing to watch the seafood donation program grow, and just with the help of so many entities. And yeah, we're going to hear from some of those folks next. We've got Stephen Rhodes in Sitka, and he's the Vice President of Procurement at Seafood Producers Cooperative. So really thankful to have Stephen with us. I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So I am the kind of nuts and bolts part of this equation that we really rely on Alpha and ASFT and their partners to come up with the concept and the funding. And then when it comes down to the availability of fish and cutting it and getting it there is where we as the processor come in. And I'm going to share my very small number of slides. So SPC is a 100% fisherman-owned cooperative in Sitka. This is Tlingit Haida land. We have been here for 77 years, and we are still in operation every single day.
Hey, Stephen,
We
real quick, I don't know if it's just me, but I am only seeing a black screen. I don't know if others are too.
I'm in the same boat there, Elizabeth. It just said Stephen Rhodes has started sharing screen.
that unless there are processors to buy the fish, there isn't a harvest. Is my audio okay?
Audio,
We've got you.
audio.
Okay, I was getting some errors here from my my Sitka internet, but I keep coming back to just the business of fishing and how it all has to be together. Without the taxes from the harvesters and the processors, there's not funding for Fish and Game to do the management practices to make it a sustainable fishery. So I keep on harping on that one. When we talk about processing the fish and profitable, I believe that looking forward into the future for seafood donation programs, we have to make it long-term possible to fund the fishermen and the cost of processing it, so it's less a donation and grant-funded operation and is more a long-term going concern. I pulled up here, I just pulled up a 4 to 5 pound black cod today. And when I broke down where the money is, 65% of the sale value goes to the fishermen at the dock. And we've got 17% is actually the cost of processing it. That's the electricity to freeze it, the wages of the folks on the floor cutting the fish, and all the packaging supplies. But as much as that, as 16% is just the cost of keeping the business open. And it's a really big cost to open and do the maintenance and just be ready for fish. And when it comes down to it, on this fish, there's about a 2% margin of what we would call profit, that in our case, we give back to our fishermen. But it's pretty easy that if we give any kind of discount on a fish into a food donation program, it ends up costing our members or our fishermen money. So trying to remember that there has to be a processor in the middle of it to accomplish these things, I think is pretty key, and understanding what the costs are to get those done. In working with Alpha, we tried to figure out, what do we want to give back to fishermen on our lingcod program directly as a stipend? What's the fair market value for the fish? And how do we get all that together? And we learned how to look at that. And unless you can pay the processor enough to do it, it doesn't go very far. That the programs kept getting shot down because we couldn't do them over and over again. The biggest lessons we learned are the difficulties of getting it from here to there and getting what people want. That in certain seasons, we have an excess of something that's very affordable, but not a lot of people in downtown Seattle know how to fillet and cook up a black cod. That some communities like Chignik, they prefer an H&G salmon. And then the most difficult thing for us to produce, the pin bone out portion, nearly everybody can use. But trying to balance out what you're trying to deliver to the communities in need and what they're looking for. And getting product from the source to the communities in Alaska turned out to be a really big program. That we ship a lot of things from Sitka to Seattle, but there's almost no cargo traveling from Sitka to Anchorage except by air. So to get a frozen container of fish from Sitka, it has to go Sitka to Seattle and all the way back up to Anchorage again. If it's right outside your door, there's no real trouble getting it to people. But if it's an island hop away, it can be really confusing. We ended up moving fish on trollers who donated their time to bring it down to Heidelberg and Craig. But those are, I think, the two biggest things we struggled with in these programs is what is the product, can we produce it, and can we get it there? And the logistics of that are slowly evolving. I think in the end, we found it was cheaper to air freight fish to Anchorage than it was to run it in a container through Seattle. So lots of little quirks and bumps go in there. We're really happy to work with Alpha. We've been partners for years, mostly in fish politics. And when they built AO and ASFT, we were right alongside and supporting all of that. So that's my brief look at the processor component to this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And yeah, as you touched on, just a lot of nuts and bolts, which is, in the end, kind of what makes a lot of this possible. So yeah, we'll dig more into that shortly. Next, we've got George Anderson, who is a lifelong fisherman and president of the Chignik Intertribal Coalition. So George, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, we've got you.
How about a slideshow?
We've also got that.
Oh, you do? Wow, okay, well. Okay, thank you. I am George Anderson, president of the Chignik Intertribal Coalition, and Stephen's the nuts and bolts, and Natalie's the supplier. I think I fall in the receiving end some of this. So anyways, here's Chignik Lagoon, Chignik Bay, Chignik Lake, Ivanoff Bay, and Perryville, commonly referred to as the Chigniks. And a brief history. Chignik was once the shining star of Alaska for sockeye. So before my time, of course, but other resources harvested in the past were shrimp and crab, halibut, herring, and cod. All but salmon and a few pea cod are all but depleted. During the 70s and 80s, Chignik was doing so well. The Board of Fisheries actually allocated fish away from Chignik to our neighboring communities. Kodiak is off to the east and the South Peninsula off to the west. And these areas at that time were struggling to meet their needs, just as we are now. We are attempting to regain some of those fish just to meet our escapement goals presently, but that is a subject for a different meeting for another time. So in fact, next week here in Anchorage at the Egan Center, we'll be asking the Board of Fisheries for some conservation considerations. So I'll move on here. Resilience to us, the ability of a region or community to anticipate, withstand, and bounce back from these shocks and disruptions and the stresses involved with shortages. This might be weather related, climate change, a failed fishery, recently supply chain disruptions. My presentation will focus on responsive state initiatives and steady state initiatives that we've been introduced to here, not of our choosing. But I'll talk a little bit now about our immediate response. In 2018, we suffered an economic disaster for the first time in our recorded history. We've always endured bad seasons along with good seasons, but we've never experienced no season. Along with no commercial income to buy heating oil or food for the winter, we had very little in the way of subsistence as well. Our freezers, smokehouses, buckets, cans, and jars were all empty for the long winter ahead. We didn't know what to do with no fish to put away. So after reaching out to many funding agencies around the state, we finally ended up landing a grant from UMCOR, which stands for United Methodist Committee on Relief. It's a global ministry, and they actually reached out to us. And an interesting note on the importance of networking during these types of conferences. In the summer of 2018, ANTHC was holding a water quality conference up in the interior. One of their staff members on a break started a conversation with a random person about, the news of Chignik not getting their fish back. And the representative from UMCOR said, "What's Chignik?" So the ball started rolling from there, and we received a grant just shy of $1 million. I would say 800 and some thousand to cover food and the logistics of getting that food delivered to us. So, well, we had the donation, but we had no way to get food to the people, so we needed to develop a plan. We were fortunate enough to have 3-Star Government Solutions, which is a subsidiary of our neighboring community of Perryville. It's of their ANCSA Corporation Oceanside, and they were able to assist us in getting our program up and running. They set up our email accounts, smart sheet training, and employee handbooks for our community coordinators that we appointed for each community. And since we were not able to receive grant funds of this magnitude, we partnered with Bristol Bay Native Association that took care of the reporting and the closeout. 3-Star Government Solutions trained us to do this, as well as the managers at Diamond Costco here in Anchorage and the Business Center Costco located in Linwood, Washington. And once we were all trained up on how to process an order, we sent our application forms out. And here's a blank sample form we had for Costco. These items are food staples. There were no sugary snacks or sodas or anything like that. This seems straightforward to use now to us. But when you're used to filling your freezer with meat that you hunted or fish that you caught, you can easily guess how much room that takes. This was not the case with buying in bulk from Costco for most of our people. I hadn't realized until we got this program moving that almost everyone shops with their eyes. Most people, especially our elders, had a very difficult time with the form and not shopping in person. So keep in mind, this is before DoorDash or Instacart came to be. This was all new to us. So our coordinators, if you can see there, there are clickable links on most of the items so people can see what they were getting. This was a very difficult program to put together. Here we have on the left is Coastal Transportation from Seattle. They gave us huge discounts in shipping to get the logistics. I want to say up to 60% discounts for getting it there. And they realize if there's no communities anymore, there's no stops for them. So they really helped us out. After the food got there, we hired our local seiners to tender the fish. Tender the groceries. They should be tendering fish, but groceries off to our communities. And you can see here, everyone came out and helped. So, okay, fast forward to next year, we had a drought. 2 of our 5 communities had drought. So with a minor, I guess there was a revision to our grant. We delivered 126 pallets of bottled water from Linwood Costco to our communities there as well. So fast forward 2020, another fish disaster. So here we come, and this is where we really appreciated the help from Alaskan Zone, Northland Seafoods in Dellingham. Everyone who needed fish got it. It was luckily we had, some of this distribution in place, but yeah, it was greatly appreciated. We have so many people to thank here. So anyways, after those responsive state initiatives, we realized we need to bounce forward and learn from our mistakes. We learned a lot about ourselves as people, and we needed to stop treading water and start swimming again. Prepare for our future, and I am sure we have a future of disruptions in food security, unfortunately. So using the capacity we built, the experience we gained through all these responsive state initiatives, we realized we needed to look for long-term solutions and look at these steady state initiatives. And on the right here, you can see, you just have to be honest with yourself and your people. Each community has very talented folks, and everyone comes out to help. So I'll move on here. So in building resilience, we realize we need to reach out and participate in the sort of things we're doing right now, but do this for your tribes, attend meetings, talk to your policymakers, talk to your congressional delegation, your representatives, legislators. All you can do is just strengthen these relationships that we're having. I'm finding a few more today again, so I just really appreciate it. So anyhow, we're involved in the Tribal Resiliency program right now that BIA offers. We're in a Category 6 grant presently, and we're looking forward to a Category 2 to implement our findings. So I probably went over, but here's my contact information, and I'll stick around for questions if anybody has any. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you guys. So thank you.
Thank you so much, George. Yeah, lots of great information. And I just really love this idea of bouncing forward. And I think that's definitely something I'm going to adopt and share with others. So thank you for that. Our final panelist who we're going to hear from before we get into more of a discussion and questions is Sam Schimel, who's finishing his undergraduate degree at Stanford University. So we're really grateful he was willing to make time for this. To join us today. And Sam is also the chair of the Arctic Youth Network and was really the one who helped launch Operation Fish Drop in partnership with Alaskan Zone and the Seafood Donation Program. So we'll hear from Sam now.
Oh, thank you for the kind introduction, Elizabeth, Natalie, George, everybody. It's good to see you here. Can you all hear me all right?
We've got you.
Great. So wala ho. My name is Sam Schimel. I come from the village of Gamble out in the Bering Sea. I've grown up watching and learning and seeing how our traditions are inexorably connected to our subsistence. We as Alaska Native peoples are connected to our land in a really unique way. We live in harmony with it. We live alongside of it, and we live within our place. There's kind of this Western idea of science that people are separate from the environment. We take a categorically different approach to that. And this approach is really key to being able to continue our ways of life and continue how we've lived for thousands of years. Right now, you're watching as climate change and ecosystem use changes and different players in the field are making it different for us to be able to continue practicing that subsistence, are making it difficult for us to be able to continue practicing our ability to be native, to have our traditions, to have access to our foods, to have access to our traditions around stories and our traditions around preparing and keeping foods. And these changes have grave implications not only for, I see a chat there, not only for our communities, but also for our resources as well. Last year you watched as the Yukon River all across it was closed down to subsistence fishing. It was closed down because of poor salmon returns that were resultant from climate change. And I remember talking with my friends up and down the river, asking them how they were doing, what they wanted, how we could help, what they needed. And they said, our community, we're hungry, yeah, but some of our young people are also depressed. Our kids are trying things that they wouldn't otherwise be doing because instead of being at fish camp, they're in town. Our kids aren't engaged in culture. Our kids aren't engaged in traditions. Our kids are engaged in messing up and having too much time on their hands. And so when it comes down to providing and pushing forward subsistence programs and responsible seafood programs, like what Alpha and ALSA have been able to do, it comes to, it means that you're providing not only for the immediate food that's being taken up by the people, but also for the long-term viability and the long-term well-being of our communities. On top of that, I sit on our tribe's environmental committee, and we were sitting around and talking about what makes what places our native population in a unique spot to be able to understand our environment. What places our native communities in a unique place to be able to advocate in a special way for our need to be able to manage our lands, resources, waters, and animals. And one of the elders who sits on our committee said, I know. She raised her hand and she said, it's our connection to our food. Every day we eat the land. Every day we eat off of the land. Every day we eat as our ancestors ate. Every day, she said, I eat salmon. I eat fish that's caught in our traditional net. It's smoked in a traditional way. It's brought to my house. It's gifted to me. And what that does for my generation, she's speaking about our elders, is it reminds us of why we need to fight to continue to instill in our youth a responsible systems of knowing and systems of being. What it does for our youth is it gets them to understand our connection and the importance of effective management and the need to be able to have a say in how our future is determined with regards to the water, how our future is determined with regards to the fish, how our future is determined with regards to salmon. And so when it comes down to it, there's this kind of nexus that food security and food security programming and responsible fisheries all lie at. And they're all interconnected. There's pieces that relate to immediate food security. There's pieces that relate to ensuring that we have a strong environmental footing that pushes forward responsible practices in the future. There's a piece that ensures that we have access to being what it means to be indigenous in Alaska, and we have access to the tools that allow us to create healthy and happy communities. And so I guess seeing these different pieces, I was lucky enough to work with Natalie and Elizabeth on a program called Operation Fish Drop, which has brought around 20,000 pounds of salmon to our urban and rural community members alike across Alaska. The program really starts with common sense, which I think is at the core of a lot of the policies that Alpha and ALSA are putting together, where you see there's a need on the ground. In this case, it was our communities didn't have access to our traditional foods. And there's a common sense solution to it, which is you get us access to our food. Figure out how to bring us salmon, figure out how to get salmon into the freezers of our elders and on the plates of our youth. And so that's what we did. It was a smashing success, and it worked very well. And we're hoping to continue it. But in order to continue it, we need to make sure that we're responsibly managing our seafood resources, that we're making sure that our salmon are around for tomorrow. So yeah, I hope that we can all put our minds together and figure out how we can ensure that there is another 10,000 years of fish coming to our rivers in Alaska, and that our native peoples are at the heads of that leadership, and that we take our responsibility to sustainability seriously. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. Yeah, you said so much so well there, and yeah, just really appreciate your insights. We're going to kind of transition now into questions and sort of bounce around to each of you. I want to go to a question that was raised in the chat, because it's actually a question that I was hoping you all could reflect on as well. And that question in the chat was just how, fish being donated from Bristol Bay to the YK region is going to Seattle first to be processed. And, Stephen, you touched on this a bit. And just, how do we build a new system, new pathways for moving salmon and important culturally nutritional foods to communities of need? And I guess, Stephen, I'm kind of going to direct this question to you at start, and Natalie, if you have thoughts too, because you both are very much involved in processing and moving fish around, but like how it's so inefficient right now, what are ways that we can rebuild these pathways and get the fish to where it needs to go? And what are you doing currently to help? I guess the other part of the question too is what can others be doing to help build those new pathways? Is it infrastructure that's needed? Funding, other things, but Stephen, curious for your thoughts on that question.
Well, thanks, Elizabeth. I love that George mentioned coastal transportation. They are a neat outfit that runs cargo all up and down Alaska, but they don't go to Anchorage, they don't go to Kodiak, and we use them quite a bit for some in-between shipping. And I think the message from that is you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You're not going to create a shipping company that is dedicated just to moving fish from the source to where it's needed, but you can partner with existing businesses that are already doing it, but just may not be doing exactly what you're asking or doing the product that you're already thinking of. That, I know that, coastal moves from Bristol Bay. I don't think they get up to the YK, but I know that other barges do. We sometimes move fish boat to boat in Dutch, which is not a really common thing. Usually Dutch moves fish down to Seattle or to Asia. But I think looking to businesses and innovators in your community and looking at how they're moving products and see if there's a add-on you can do in the middle.
That's great. Thank you. And Natalie, I don't know if you want to expand on that, because I know you guys spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get fish from point A to B and who had the capacity to process it. And just wondering too, one of the comments just posted in the chat just speaks to sort of processing capacity in state. And it seems like something we should have, but is actually something we don't have in places like Anchorage, but wondering if you could speak to that.
Sure. As we have, that's been, I guess, one of the major challenges or obstacles too is transportation and the logistics and accessibility of sometimes the product that we want to provide and that folks want, like a whole fish or head and gutted, and it's just sometimes it's hard to get your hands on it, or it's not something available by the processors, or like you said, we are having to procure a lot of our seafood even from Seattle and then have it shipped up and then trying to figure out how to get it to all those different pieces. There's a lot of logistics involved. And like one example is like even when we shipped whatever it was, the 15 to 20,000 up for the Operation Fish Drop into Alaska Food Bank and Armed Services of YMCA, there was just a lot of moving parts and pieces and like things changed on the fly. And that's where the partnerships and the relationships have just been crucial to, the success in getting the seafood out there and getting it distributed. But I think that's kind of where we're headed is like, what's sustainable? What's the plan to get the type of fish or the product to the places that need it? And so it's, I'll speak to that, I guess, in a minute when I talk about what our next steps are, but I know that is part of what we're looking at is those different strategies and just sometimes the logistical nightmare of it all at times.
Yeah, definitely. And Glenna, I'm glad you asked about here in the chat, sort of more hyper local processing. Yeah, because I think that's where starting to get creative at the community level is really important. I know some folks in Cordova, looking at, can you take containers and sort of have little like super micro processing plants just to have a little more flexibility and freedom, and the option to process year round. And I don't know if any of the panelists here are familiar with any efforts like that in your communities or other communities around the state. But it definitely seems like a place where there's a lot of opportunity.
I'll add on to that just real quickly. We at Kenites have a fish processing site down at our beach property, which is just south of mouth the Kenai River, where tribal members are able to come and vacuum pack, freeze, smoke, and process their fish. The system relies on about 4 or 5 vacuum packers. Bags are provided and things like that. It makes it so that our people have a place where there is structure and somebody there to help them out in actually processing their catch, be it moose or fish, or whatever they need to pack up. And you see that there's a huge want and push for that. Like if that's closed, people are very upset. They say, hey, we need to get this thing going back over again, because nobody wants to sit at one of those little tiny vacuum packers where you gotta press a button 11 times to get a single seal. But yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Being able to process fish at home is critically important to being able to keep people engaged.
I think those are excellent points, and I'll just add to. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Norton Sound Economic Development Corporation and how it's supported fish processing in the Norton Sound area. Sam, I'm imagining you are. But I think that model has a lot of value, and being associated with the Economic Development Corp, which, I think there's 12 of them in Alaska. To me, that seems like a natural place to start some communications about how to replicate in a site-specific way. And what's beautiful about that model in particular is, since it's the Economic Development Corp, they have multiple programs that all serve to support each other in sort of a circular way. So they're providing some financial capital to help, Indigenous commercial fishermen and women get their permits, and they're making sure that those fisher folk get a fair wage for their fish, and they're selling direct to the processor there. And so it's kind of a nice closed system. And then the Economic Development Corporation does a lot of the negotiating for the sales. And I know that there is a heavy draw on resources for having a processing plant. Sorry, I've got sunshine in my eyes. But in terms of like water and energy uses, right? So this is something that might be much more feasible in regional hubs. In Southeast, some of the larger communities might be able to do something like this. I'm thinking places like Bethel that have a little more of that utility infrastructure. But I guess I'm just putting it out there as, for those of you who are working in this industry. I'm not so much anymore. I did my master's work on it and lived in Unalakleet for 3 years, which is why I know about this example. But I think that this is something that really could be replicable for the state and keeps Indigenous fisher folk involved in those fisheries. It keeps people from being bought out of permits if you have sort of this cycle that keeps supporting fishermen in an ongoing way. So throwing that out as an idea. I'm gonna let you guys with a lot more knowledge and awareness and ability to think about how we might do those kinds of things. But, to the point that it creates redundancies in our food system, right? So if we have one plant in Anchorage that we depend on and something happens and, there's an earthquake and fish can't make it to them, or, they can't get the workforce that they need to be, working at a certain capacity through a season because of a pandemic or something like that, having these more hyper local processing plants throughout the region is something I think is a great idea. And I know that we've had those in the past. There's been tons of canneries and processing plants throughout the state that have closed down over the years with the vagaries of our fish population. So I'm not naive about the fact that it's hard to keep a processing plant open, but just thinking creatively about what assets we have on hand now, what systems are in place that can be tapped to support something like that. And I'll go off mute and let you guys respond, or more questions get posed. Thanks.
I have a lot to say about the cost of keeping a processor open. And I've seen a few grant-funded processing stations for communities come and go. And it's the keeping it open that's the difficult part in those projects. Partnering with an organization that is going to manage it long term. And as processors, there is the opportunity cost when the peak of the season is running and we're making the money to keep the plant going. We would love to, but don't have time to handle a subsistence processing job. And it seems like there's the rush of the salmon run. All the equipment is in use when you need it, and then it sits there idle for the other 9 months a year. And for efficiency at our plant, we're always looking at shoulder season opportunities. That what can we do over a longer period of time with other species to help pay for that equipment. But I'm available offline if anybody wants to dig deeper in what it takes to keep things open and just the actual costs and the pitfalls of some things.
Elizabeth, I have a question. This is George for Stephen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am so glad you brought up all those points because they hit right home. Once we lost, our runs that we can count on, the processors just kind of evaporated. It's just so hard to stick around for 2 months out of the year for what, 1 million sockeye maybe if you're lucky. But my question is, have you considered processing, preparing maybe kelp or things of that nature that aren't time specific to a returning stream at a certain time, like something like that to offset your costs, keep the lights on?
Thanks, George. We're always looking to work for as many months as possible. And we have a few projects that we do that we about break even. It's just hours for the crew when we're not doing other projects. We're looking slowly at kelp. We're looking at actually reprocessing fish from Bristol Bay. So instead of shipping it all the way to Seattle, bringing it to our cold storage in Sitka, but then we run into do we have a big enough cold storage? And it's always fighting for enough capacity to do those things. And that's why a lot of the stuff goes down to Seattle. So yeah, always looking for opportunities to make the same equipment pay for itself twice. And there was a question in the chat of, what was it here, about what other things might the plant be used for? And for us, it's all seafood. That we process some bait herring in February, and we're looking to do shellfish in the other times of the year. One other thing I was thinking about in the community processing room, the costs and the rules change dramatically when you go from processing your own fish and freezing it safely versus getting it up to a commercial level where it can pass all the DEC inspections. But it's a pretty big leap of doing it in a bigger version of what you would do in your own home versus actually doing it where it can be shipped and deemed as safe to go to other communities.
Thanks, Stephen. And I'm just catching up on the chat here. So hold on a second. I just want to be sure we're running with this while we're on the topic. So Charles asked, and Stephen, this is kind of a question I think, directed to you, is the high cost due to energy, cost in rural communities, where we've got communities still using diesel, but just wondering, when it comes to costs of running a plant, how does that kind of break down, sort of big picture level, but as far as balancing, workforce, water, energy, those things?
Well, we are really lucky in Sitka to have our, we're lucky and cursed. Our high mountain hydro cost us so much money to build that our rates are going up. But, we're in the 14 cent a kilowatt hour range here. And, a few years ago, diesel power in Yakutat was 50 cents a kilowatt hour, which is just a totally different paradigm. And as we look at this year, all of our other costs are going up, but our electricity cost is not. So it's a huge factor on availability of those resources. And we have a huge amount of water available in Sitka. And I know even in Ketchikan and the district down there for utilities, they were short on hydropower because of the drought for a few years. I mean, all those things are pretty key. And I've only been in the processing sector for about 4 years, but we're learning how valuable having frenemies is. That, we compete every day head to head with North Pacific, but if our plant breaks down, they process our fish for us without hesitation. If we run out of a material, or they do, we give them up to half of what we have. And it really is key in the smaller and smaller communities of having that redundancy can be in the competition. And I've really learned to appreciate the competition in the last few years.
I think that's a really great point. Thank you. I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit, unless anyone has something they want to add to this discussion around sort of just operating costs and logistics and the realities of that. If not, Natalie, I was curious if you could speak a little bit more to just some of the partnerships that you guys have formed. And, obviously it took just a lot of team effort. And I'm curious if you could just share, kind of how those partnerships came to be. Were you guys out knocking on doors, trying to assess what the needs were? Were people coming to you? And then also, related to that, as you guys were receiving sort of getting a better sense of the need and the demand for fish, how did you guys go out and seek sort of the resources needed to meet that demand? But just, would love to hear you expand a bit on the partnerships and what you guys learned through that process.
Sure. Yeah. Well, as you said, we've created so many partnerships have been forged as a result of the creation of the seafood donation program. And first and foremost, we want to thank our funders. Catch Together has been instrumental in helping us fund and purchase the seafood. And just for those that don't know, Catch Together is a program of Catch Invest, and they invest capital to support fishermen and fishing communities. And they stepped up with initial funding, allowing us to purchase the initial 40,000 pounds of Alaska seafood fillets from Stephen from SPC. And other funders and partners were also Alaska Community Foundation, Sea Alaska, Sitka Legacy Foundation, First Bank, among others. But once we were able to get the funds, I think, and we were kind of scrambling, and I wasn't as involved with the program at that point, but scrambling to purchase the seafood and then get it out there. And we worked, with the Wave Foundation, I mentioned them earlier, who's in the Pacific Northwest, and getting those to folks along the Columbia River. And then just our network of working with different partners like Northline Seafoods, where we purchased a lot of sockeye and coho. And that was kind of, that's part of the logistical stuff of where it was coming up from Seattle and then coming to Sitka or Juneau, and then we're distributing it. So a long ways, but also all of the multiple, I guess it was kind of word of mouth, some of it, especially in Southeast, when we were distributing it to all these different communities, they heard, and we actually worked with our network of our alpha fishermen to deliver it on their freezer trollers to many of the communities, which was really neat to partner with them. And then Sea Alaska too, we worked with them to help distribute it to many local communities. And and then we were reaching out to people too, just asking, hey, are you in need of seafood? Like local community groups, even in Ketchikan, all over Sitka, because some people hadn't heard that we were even doing it. And so, but again, and then with Sam and the Arctic Youth Network, and I mean, that was a huge partnership as well. But yeah, I mean, I feel like the need is continuing. And again, it comes down to some of this logistical stuff. Like we might hear that somebody is in need and wants it, and then we're just trying to put all the pieces together to end those partnerships. But now that we've forged I mean, I feel like it's becoming easier and easier in some ways, just because we've started the network. And now if someone says, hey, we want some more seafood in Ketchikan, we've got the people to connect with to try and get it there. So I don't know, it's been really neat. And I think it's just growing too, like our network of people and groups.
Yeah, no, well, and those, I mean, all that takes time, right? And relationships. But I think you guys have clearly a really strong foundation to build from. And we'll kind of touch on that here in a little bit and where you guys are headed. But Sam, I'm curious to hear, just you reflect a little bit on sort of through your partnerships and relationships. I'm curious, how did you go about assessing the needs of, the communities that you have been in touch with the last couple of years? And, sort of, were there any surprises about the needs that you were hearing and, just sort of some of the underlying issues maybe that were causing folks to be, food insecure or just having uncertainty in their lives? But curious what you learned through that process and how you went about it.
Yeah. I mean, the ways that we assess food insecurity were twofold. One, we tried to figure out how much fish a native family actually really eats if you're from a fish eating area. And so we went to our cousins' houses, opened up their freezers and saw how much fish they had. Everybody had about 100 pounds of fish. I said, all right, well, we want to maximize our reach. We can't quite give 100 pounds to every family and every elder. We'll give them 50. And if they can't take 50, we'll give them 25. And then I went to Cook Inlet Tribal Council and the Alaska Native Heritage Center. And I asked them, I said, how many families are in your low-income housing? How many families are you guys serving? How many families are you benefiting? And they said, about 1,000 in the Anchorage area alone. Went to CITC, or I went then to the Heritage Center and said, hey, how many elders come by and are looking for food programs? And they said, probably about 60 or 70. And so the number that we came up with was about 3,500 individuals, about 1,000 families, and 60 elders. That's about 3,500 people. And so that's how we established that number of people whose food security needs weren't being met with regards to traditional foods. In terms of determining sizes, again, we went to our aunties and uncles and we said, hey, how much fish do we want? How much fish do you need? What's the least amount of fish that you can deal with? What's the smallest amount that is actually going to do you the most good? We came to the consensus of 50 pounds being that number. Now this year, though, with Tanana Chiefs Conference, we're only able to raise enough funds to be able to get 2,000 pounds. And so I called up TCC and said, hey, can you guys take some fish? I know that some of your service villages on the Yukon aren't fishing right now. And they said, yeah, we got elders and people that would be able to take it. And so that's how we determined distributions this year. But you do community surveys, you understand our food tendencies, how much we eat, how much fish we eat, where it goes. And then from there, you say, all right, we're not going to tell you to eat less fish. We're going to figure out how we can get you that fish. That's that.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah. And I know it's so simple, but it, again, just I think doing that research, taking that time to really understand what the people on the ground are needing is so key. You know, the effectiveness of, I think, some of these immediate responses, and for some programs can be a bit of an afterthought. So I think that, yeah, really speaks to the success of your program. I'm going to just sort of wrap up like this part of our discussion, you know, just maybe with a broad question for each of you to respond to, just as you think about sort of the what's next in your efforts to address some of these disruptions that are impacting your communities and industries, but just, you know, what you see as a path forward, and you know, thinking about sort of the bigger landscape we all live and operate and work in. You know, what are some of the bigger changes that you think need to happen to allow for these longer term responses and programs to become sustainable? And Natalie, I'd love to start with you, if you could speak to sort of what you guys are doing with the USDA, and then we'll have Stephen and George and Sam respond after that, and then we'll open up for just group questions.
Sure, thanks. So I kind of alluded to it before, and everybody that's on the panel is involved with this next step, which we're really excited about, but we recognize that kind of the piecemeal of funding is not sustainable in the long term of keeping the seafood donation program going and trying to meet everybody's need. And also with climate change, there's more of a demand, and, you know, reducing ocean productivity and salmon distribution. So Alpha applied for a USDA grant last year, and we received it last winter. And it's a grant to conduct a regional food system partnership project, which we're really excited about. It's more of a planning grant. And so the purpose of that is to design and implement an assessment and planning process that looks at food security and seafood and the seafood industry workforce development needs and opportunities in Alaska. And so the goal of it's a 2-year project is to build on the successful pandemic initiative that we started, and design and implement a planning and assessment process to establish basically a 10-year statewide seafood distribution and workforce development plan that includes sustainable non-federal financial strategy. So to keep it going to serve Alaska's rural and historically marginalized communities. And part of that is, so we've just started getting into the nitty gritty of it. Part of that is to create a steering committee and to guide the development of the plan. And George and Stephen and Sam are all on that steering committee, and Elizabeth is helping run it too. And so we've put it together, and it's formed, you know, of diverse, you know, tribal industry experts, nonprofits, other organizations, business and policy leaders, all sorts of folks that are going to help, you know, develop this seafood and workforce development plan. And yeah, I mean, we're hoping that, you know, the objective is to develop the strategy and for the seafood distribution and support the procurement, processing, and distribution of that seafood to insecure communities throughout Alaska. So like I said, we're just getting started, but we're excited to see where it goes. And I mean, the hope is that coming out of that, then we will have some sort of long-term strategy to keep the program going and keep meeting the need. So if anyone's interested in learning more about it, I know that Charles put in, I think, a link to an article on that. Thank you, Charles, for putting that in. I'm happy to talk to more folks too about it. And we're trying to just reach out. We'll be reaching out to probably lots of people because we're just starting in the research phase of it as well for our needs-based assessments. So hopefully that's a good overview. Ask if you have questions.
Yeah, that's great. And thank you for that overview. And I do encourage folks, you know, if you're interested in getting involved, to reach out to Natalie and to Alpha, because yeah, the idea is really to pull in as many different community members and leaders out there as we can. And just, you know, it really is about learning from each other and assessing what are the needs, what are the challenges and opportunities, and then hopefully coming up with that plan and recommendations that that we could take out there and get funded, or, you know, get policies and other things in place to support and sustain this work. So it's, yeah, pretty exciting opportunity. Yeah, Natalie's email is there in the chat, so do reach out to her. Stephen, I'm curious, yeah, if you just, as you reflect on sort of what's next and, you know, SPC's role in all of this and how you guys are dealing with disruptions and just your day-to-day operations, kind of, yeah, what do you see as sort of the bigger things that you'd like to see changing or are involved in?
Well, the worst case scenario is somebody donates fish, we donate the processing, and then it sits in our freezer and doesn't get eaten. That at my house, I have a rule that I'd rather have my fish stolen than a year old. And we have a lot of good ideas that come from the community that needs fish and from the generous fishermen. And we learned a lot in our Fish to Schools program in Sitka, where fishermen donated X number of pounds of cohos to go to the school system. And it was really hard to get SPC to commit to it, even though there was board commitment and there was fisherman commitment, because the processing plant didn't have a clear plan. And we finally got a lot of that figured out. And then our CFO says, what is all this free processing you're doing? So we're coming down to budgeting. Like, we are figuring out what it actually costs us to do the project, how much we're going to do, and we're putting that amount in the budget. So it's not a freebie, open-ended, as much as we feel like doing we can, but actually putting some structure to it so that we know how much we can give, and we can give people realistic ideas of what we can and cannot do. Just trying to make it a business decision to do this instead of just, we'll do it if we can. And trying to get that commitment from an organization of, I can do A, B, and C, and trying to stick to it from the organization, but also not asking for things that are just off the wall. Always following Linda Benkin's lead is a good thing, that she tells me what boards to be on and which steering committees, and I'm not allowed to say no. So I'm looking forward to that steering committee and finding ways to push this forward.
Great, thanks. And George, curious, just, you know, you spoke in your introductions just about some of sort of the immediate things that you guys are putting in place to address the fishery disaster you've had in Chignik, and curious, as you're thinking, you know, long-term and resiliency, you know, what does that look like for you and your community?
Yeah, thank you for the question there. Yeah, for us, looking forward, you know, I think research is huge for us. We need to figure out what's going on with our fisheries, of course, and you know, we have a great handle on habitat. You know, we don't know what's going on with the food web out in that's called blue water, and then we have a pretty good idea what's happening, you know, as the fish are on their way back. So, you know, if we can tighten up, you know, have less information gaps, the better. So I always believe in research, but in the interim, you know, if we can get our people busy, maybe they do get into the blue economy a little bit. Maybe we look at you know, harvesting kelp. You know, we have a lot of talented people. We have a lot of gear. They know how to work on the water, and ultimately our people want to work. You know, Sam brought up something that is very important, and our younger folks are starting to lose their identity. When you lose your fish, you start losing your identity and your connection to the water. We haven't had any adverse effects yet, but I believe if this trend continues, we're going to start to see some real issues with our youth and then our culture. So very important topics. I very look forward to attending on this steering committee. Thank you for the invite to that, by the way, so I can maybe answer these questions a little better in the future. So that's the best I could do right now, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And yeah, there's no easy short answer to these questions, which is why I really appreciate all of you digging in today. And Sam, we'll finish with you. And I mean, as a young leader, yeah, as you look forward, you know, what do you see as some of the places where there's real opportunity to, you know, dealing with some of these disruptions and sort of continuing these partnerships that you and others here have formed?
Well, I think our issues aren't getting smaller. Our problems aren't solving themselves. And we need to really work together to be able to ensure that we have salmon, fish, crabs, all of our ocean resources for the next generations. What I think the central piece, what I think the central thing that is needed in order to ensure resiliency is tribally led control, is the ability for us to regulate our own subsistence, us to regulate our own waters, us to regulate how we manage runs. I think that needs to be informed by partners like Alpha and Alcin, groups who are able to bring together the best available science and the best available indigenous science and say, all right, hey, look, this is what we got. We want to start some shellfish aquaculture, and our ocean's a little bit too acidic. Let's plant a kelp garden around it. Then we're going to be able to grow our oysters. Or it's time to start discussing run enhancements. Let's figure out how we can do it without maximally, while minimally impacting the actual salmon run. And so I think what it comes down to is ensuring that we leverage our connections today to have a return of fish tomorrow. If we don't do that, and if we just disregard it and continue to just kind of go down the path that we've been on for the last 100-odd years, I think that we will end in a very poor place. And so, you know, I think as the late Don Young said, follow the fish. We have to make sure that we're following the fish, that we're guarding the fish, that we're protecting fish, and that we're ensuring that our next generation has access to the fish. And so that's really what I think it comes down to.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really the perfect place to end. And yeah, taking care of the fish and let the fish then take care of us, and we can take care of each other. So thank you. Thank you all. And I would just like to open it up to questions from the audience or comments or reflections. I know we've covered a lot here in the last hour or so. But yeah, just want to open it up to the group and any final questions or thoughts. And I'll just check too. I apologize if I miss any questions in the chat. So I'm just gonna look through quickly and see. Yeah, thanks, Glenna, for adding, just sharing that example of the proof of concept that Sam was just speaking to. So lots of great resources here in the chat. Thank you, Charles, for adding some of the stories about Alpha's work and others. So lots of good information there too. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, any final words from our panelists? Otherwise, we can wrap it up a little early.
I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. Thanks to you, Elizabeth, for organizing us all. And we hope people stay involved. And like Elizabeth said, reach out to me or to me if you're interested in finding out more about our project and how to get involved with our steering committee and our plans for the future. But yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Same here, Elizabeth. This is George. Yeah, really appreciate the opportunity to share and learn. This has been great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and giving me the opportunity to listen to what everybody had to say. I think it's circles like this that are most valuable because they let us know what we don't know.
This
See
is,
one hand raised by Mao before you all disembark.
Hey, sorry, this is going off kind of what you guys have been saying, that, you know, we don't really know that each other exists, or it's hard to kind of have communication about who's doing this work. But I was wondering if you guys know of any resource that's like compiling all these different groups in Alaska that are donating fish, essentially, or any way to keep in contact a little better and collaborate. Any thoughts? Thanks. Thank you all so much. This was really amazing.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly, and Natalie, feel free to add on here. I mean, I know that's part of the intent with this regional food system partnership grant that Alpha's received, is to sort of look at what other seafood donation programs are out there, where there are needs that aren't being met, and sort of assess that, better understand that landscape, so that as Alpha does its own planning for the future of its seafood donation program, it's addressing any current gaps that exist or future gaps that might be there in the future, not being redundant with others. So I do think that's part of the intent and hope, is that in the next year or two, we would have kind of that map of what exists and how do we help, you know, connect the dots too, because I do think we've all got our heads down. We're all focused on our piece of the puzzle, and how do we put those pieces together in a bigger way. But Natalie, feel free to expand, or others on that.
No, well said. I think, yeah, that's what our plan is. And from what I know, I don't think there's any groups out there that have compiled all of that. So
Yeah.
that's part of the purpose, I think, of the grant too, and the project. So hopefully more on that at some point soon.
And Natalie, I don't know if you've been in touch with Robbie or I'm assuming you're aware, but I think you know, Mao, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but I think that this is a common theme in Alaska. It's a small state, but we don't always know who's working on the same, you know, topics and issues that we are. And so what I'm getting to is AFPC actually has a regional food system partnership grant right now, and we're working on the same thing in terms of just mapping, doing a asset mapping program, and that's basically the extent of this project that we're all working on. So we're looking at each different region throughout the state. We've created these nodes, and from there, we're using those leaders in each one of those regions. You know, a node is usually anywhere from 3 to 5 people, to help them actually create a asset map. Like, who do we have working on these issues? And if you would like to talk more about that offline, I myself or Robbie would be happy to talk to you. And also, I will see if I can find it before we go offline, but I'll drop the link to just our little blurb about it on the AFPC website. But I think that that's something, it sounds like you guys could replicate in, you know, in sort of the fisheries industry side of things. Like, we're looking at food systems in a broad scope, which does include some fisheries. But, you know, the thing I've learned about working on grant projects for over a decade now is like, none of it's ever in totally like captured, right? There's always more to know and to do. And I think you guys have a much more specific focus that you could really hone in your strategy for whatever it is you need to know. But that's just one thought to help get you guys started. So let me find that link real quick and I'll drop it in the chat. And you know, beyond that, I'll just say, you guys, Elizabeth, especially, you've made my job as a moderator really easy. Thank you. Thanks to all of you for speaking today, to all our panelists. I think that this was a really rich and inspiring discussion. So thank you all for the work that you do every day to make a difference in Alaska, and you know, keep on doing it. And we're happy to hear from you. So everyone, I guess, moderator duties. There are some closing, conference closing activities going on. I dropped my agenda information, sorry. So at 5:15, including the youth track share out and some perspectives for future work in AFPC. So you guys can take a minute to visit the community board, the exhibitor booths, the silent auction, and join back to that main room at 5:15 if you'd like to kind of have some closing session and connect before we all disperse back to the good work that we're all doing. All right, thanks so much, everyone, and I'll get right on that link.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.